Hi, I'm Jon Kirkman. I'm a broadcaster and music journalist based in the UK. I've got a whole mountain of things to go through here, but what I want to talk to you about now is this. It's the latest in the Marillion box sets that have been coming out. Of course, Marillion over the last few years have been reissuing all of their EMI albums in expanded and box set format. This was the band's second album, which came out in early 1984, and I went to see them on this tour. I saw them at the Manchester Apollo. I can even tell you that the support band was a Liverpool band called Rage, who had quite a lot of connection with Marillion. In fact, so much so that their drummer, who was killed in a car crash in 1984, was the inspiration for a track called Milo on Misplaced Childhood and Lords of the Backstage. Big friends with the band, but that's why they were on the tour. It was their last tour, sadly, but this was an interesting album at the time because I thought, wow, big move forward for the band, except, in my opinion, for the drummer situation. They started off, of course, as a band with Mick Pointer being the drummer. He was sacked. Then they got in a guy called Andy Ward. Yes, the Andy Ward, you know him. He was the drummer in Camel. That didn't last very long. He kind of sadly, he was going through a few issues himself at the time, so he was replaced by a guy called John Martyr, who I think had been in a band called Mr. Big, the British Mr. Big, not the American Mr. Big. He was in turn replaced by Jonathan Mover, who would go on to be the drummer in GTR. Finally, coming to the rescue at the last minute was a guy called Ian Mosley, who'd previously been in Steve Hackett's band, played with Darrell Way's Wolf. Darrell Way, of course, the violinist in Curved Air. And, of course, Ian, bless his cotton socks, is still with the band now. What I didn't realise until I watched the documentary that's contained in this, there's all the details there if you want to have a quick, closer look at those. This was a very difficult album to record. Now, I was not aware of this at the time at all. I just thought the songs were really good, and I thought as a follow-up album to Script for a Jester's Tear, this was the business. I really, really liked this. Now, in between this and Misplaced Childhood, there was an album called Reel to Reel, which was then called, in a very popular format, the mini album. In other words, it looked like an album, but it only had about 7 or 8 tracks on rather than the usual 12. Reel to Reel was kind of buying them time, really, before Misplaced Childhood. We've already done interviews with the guys on Misplaced Childhood. They were on the point of being dropped by EMI at that point, so they pulled the rabbit out of the hat in splendid terms. This album is a very dark album. With a wonderful cover by Mark Wilkinson. As you see there. Now that's not Fish, apparently, but you can see why people think it's him. And there's lots of little clues on there, and there's the rest of the room. I'll open it up and show you there. And that's the front and back of the album. There's lots of references to the songs on here. I have to say that probably the best single for me, is Assassin, and of course it came out as an edited format. They even got it played on breakfast TV at the time, as I recall. I loved that track, but I also loved things like Jigsaw and Punch and Judy, which was another single. And as I said, I thought this was a really, really excellent follow-up, but it was like pulling teeth for the band, and they had a big problem in the sense they were all brought together in a studio to hear the mixes of the album, and they said, well, yeah, it's okay, we'd like to change a few things. So sorry guys, it's gone to production. So again, it probably holds memories for all of the bands, some of them not so good, but inside here, of course, you get, there's the CDs there, and you get a wonderful book. I'll flick through it briefly to give you an idea, and there's some great live photos, and there are obviously some photos from the studio sessions and the writing sessions. Now, of course, at this point in the 80s, technology was moving very quickly regarding keyboards and digital effects for guitars. So both Steve Rothery and Mark Kelly were sort of using some new equipment in those days. So again, they said that we weren't really sure how to use a lot of these things, but we encompassed the, if you like, the breadth of the new technology into our style, which is like really, really what most musicians were doing at the time. I mean, musicians, they're not technophobes at all. They embraced new technology, most of them anyway, and they love playing with their new gadgets and things like that. And Marillion, and certainly Steve Rothery and Mark Kelly were no different there. Solid work by Pete Travis as well on bass. And of course, Ian Mosley, who really does stick it in the back of the net, to use a football euphemism. Considering it's his first album with Marillion, he really got the tone of the band and what he should be doing, and he's gone from strength to strength throughout. He's really a pillar of the band these days, and he's still with them, which is all good news. But this was a slightly harder album to make than I think any of them thought at the time. Live, well, you wouldn't have thought it had been a hard trial doing them. I remember having this on vinyl, and I had a promo of it, and it was signed to me from all of the band, which was really nice. And they did that in those days to various DJs on the radio and things like that. I must admit, when I saw them, I thought they were excellent. They weren't too happy about the album. I think at the time they had to put on a brave face, but I don't think there's any shame in this album at all. I think it's a wonderful album. I don't honestly believe that Marillion have ever made a bad album, and for a second album, I think this really does the business for me. And I'm sure all you Marillion fans out there will think the same. I know there are loads of you out there, and there's people who embrace the whole career. There's some people who just like the Fish years. If you're in the latter, you'll definitely love this, because I really like what Fish is doing on here. I think he's singing better than ever as well, despite the usual rock and roll influences that were going on with the band and being played upon the band at the time. I think the whole band is firing on all cylinders here. Although at the time, in the studio, maybe they thought, it's not the best we could have done. But I personally think it's a really, really good album. And in addition to that, I'm going to be talking to Steve Rothery, Mark Kelly, and Fish. So check out the Listen Again files on our SoundCloud page. I will flag these when these are up actually on the website. And I'll flag it on the Facebook pages for Who Let the Prog Out, or Tales from the Prog Vault, and also Classic Rock Radio, and my own page. But there you have it, the new 4-disc set from Marillion, and it's their second album, Fugazi. Great memories for me, I'm sure for you too. I guess bittersweet memories for some of the guys in Marillion, but for me it's still an 8 or a 9. Actually, let's be generous, it's still a 9 out of 10 for me with this album, and I'm sure you're going to love it.